Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. This is the first episode of the podcast I put out in a little while. It took a little break, and now we're back. And I've got a lot of great episodes planned for the coming weeks, so stay tuned. And I've really been enjoying the shift to fall. It happened very suddenly here in Boulder, Colorado last week. It went from hot, smoggy summer, like smoke from wildfires, to this very clear, cool weather. Whew. So today I'm speaking with Melissa Moffet. And Melissa is someone who has, basically, my understanding, built her business as a coach and as a teacher through Instagram, basically. So it was really interesting to talk with her and get to hear about her journey, her life, how she's created success through using social media, and to talk with someone who has such a positive relationship with social media. You know, for all the very valid criticisms about it, there is also a lot of good to Instagram, to Facebook, to all these social media platforms. And I think, like with so much in life, it comes down to your personal relationship with it that really determines whether it is a net positive or more of a negative force in your life. And Melissa talks about that, and she shares some really good tips and advice about how to kind of reset your own relationship with social media and have a positive one. I'm actually going to follow some of the things she suggested, one of which I've heard before, but I've never actually done it, but it's to unfollow everyone that you're following and then consciously add back the people that you truly want to follow and whose posts and things you actually really want to see. She has a great sense of humor, and I think that, that comes through in our conversation. We talk about a bunch of different topics. If you look at the show notes, you can see more of those below. And just to go back to this idea of the relationship that we have with things, whether it be drugs or alcohol or maybe, even obviously relationships, but things like social media too, your diet, the food you eat. There isn't really, in my understanding, a clear-cut black or white, good or bad with most things in general. And in fact, the things that tend to be the most problematic for people, they're problematic because there is value in them, because they are important, because they are powerful. And so to have a conscious relationship with them so that it's what you want it and need it to be, rather than a victim of it. And of course, the rub or the trick here is if you just kind of let things run their course, so to speak, without some amount of conscious energy and engagement and attention and awareness put on it, the end result probably isn't going to serve you so well. So I think things like Instagram, Facebook, all these websites and apps and platforms and devices, they are designed to be addictive. They are designed to grab our attention, and that has this effect over time of kind of stealing or lessening our life force and energy, actually. So I think, as our lives become more and more dominated by technology, we really need to take responsibility ourselves to have a conscious relationship with these things, with the understanding that they are addictive, but also to see the benefit and value and to make them work for you. So those are just some thoughts I have on social media in general. Melissa and I talk about a lot more than that. I think you will really appreciate getting to hear from her. Her presence and warmth shine through, as always. Without further ado, I bring you Melissa Moffet. So I'm here today with Melissa Moffet. Melissa, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and talk with you today.
Yeah, you were just talking before we started recording that you had a spontaneous trip to upstate New York. Otherwise, we would have been in person.
I know. Yeah, super last minute, drove 3 days across the country, but I'm happy to be here on Zoom regardless.
Yeah, it's cool that you can do that. I like being spontaneous sometimes. Like, I'm trying to have more quality in my life of just doing things without thinking about it as much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally
like that for you?
Sense. Yeah, there's I feel like my life is like sometimes more of that recently. I actually did an astrology reading with a long time. He's been doing like part Buddhist, part Western astrology readings for like 40 years. And the main theme was like, maybe don't be quite so impulsive. Like that was like a recurring thing. Because I do a lot of very impulsive things, but this one felt really good. So yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds like sometimes you've done impulsive things that didn't feel so good.
Sometimes, yeah, I feel like a lot of I've made plenty of mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, but thankfully I'm open to learning from them. But yeah, I've done plenty of impulsive things that worked out, and then plenty of impulsive things that I was like, there's a lesson here. So I've been working on, rooting a little more in the last few years, and using a little more discernment, boundaries, things like that. And
you're good.
It's working out. Yeah.
I remember a teaching I got one time around the difference between being impulsive versus being spontaneous, and like making a distinction between those two. And impulsivity in the way they were talking about it was like more habitual, more I want to eat a chocolate cookie and like just doing it, or more addictive, maybe less mature. And the spontaneous was like this maturation of wisdom where you can just do things without having to think it through so much.
Yeah. I love that. This trip definitely felt more on the spontaneous side because we had so many beautiful synchronicities lining up along the trip, and being here has been really wonderful. So I love that distinction. Yeah, it makes total sense. I think sometimes it feels like, I don't know, at least for me, sometimes it feels like there's a mixture. Like for instance, like wisdom's trying to say something, but then I get really excited sometimes and take it like a little too far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, take it too far. Yeah.
A little. I'm like maybe the wisdom's like, let's go over there, and I'm like, let's just move. Let's just and then wisdom's like, well, I mean, you could just wait a second.
Right.
Yeah.
In that middle way.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, I like that we're talking about this, because I feel like a lot of clients that I work with in my therapy practice probably are more on the cautious side, or like it can be like if someone is feeling more depressed, for example, it's hard to have that kind of movement that you're talking about. Like it takes a certain amount of trust, and if you have trauma or traumatic experiences in your past, it can like stop you from acting on your instincts. It's like there's like a holding back quality, or the fearful quality.
That makes sense. Yeah. Like more of like a safety thing.
Right.
But then I wonder if there is the other side too, where it's like that more of a repressing, right? Where you're like, I'm not going to take any big risks. Or then there can be the side where it's like reactive, where it's like, I'm going to take all the risks, right, because this is what, especially if, I don't know, it seems like people respond in different ways. I think I more was on the side of like more reactive, where I'm like, I'm just going to live in like kind of a chaotic way. And because I was like kind of used to chaos maybe. And so it's kind of coming to terms with, things can be exciting and things can be fun, but it doesn't have to be chaotic.
Yeah. That makes sense. Doesn't have to be chaotic or reactive or, yeah. Well, yeah, this is a cool way to start a conversation. How would you introduce yourself? Like, I mean, I know you work as a coach and you help people. How would you describe that or talk about to people who don't know you or don't know what you're doing?
Well, it's evolved over time. I think the best way to kind of explain it would be to share a little bit of the evolution of it. Mm-hmm. So I was an engineer. That was, I did I'm from the South, right? So I'm from Tennessee, and I did the whole growing up thing and was good at math and science. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So basically a couple of people in my life suggested I should be an engineer. And I was just like, okay. And then I went to undergrad and grad school for that. And I had this like creeping feeling throughout that period that wasn't the thing. But I didn't know what was. But during that time, I was getting interested in, more holistic side of healing. I was on my own healing journey. I got interested in meditation. And then after grad school, I did a yoga teacher training, which was really, at that point, I was like, yeah, I want to do something like this, but because I came from such a traditional background, that didn't seem feasible at all, right? I wasn't living in Boulder, Colorado at the time. I was living in like Tennessee, and then I started working at this firm, and it didn't feel right at all. And then I had a couple of things, like my dad got pretty sick. He had a heart attack, and then I had like a near-death experience, and I was just like
how old were you at this point?
I was maybe 20, 24, 25. Okay. 25, I think. And I worked at this firm for about 4 months, and then I quit and I moved back home to be with my dad, having maybe a few ideas of what I was going to do. I had built a social media following at that point. So I had an audience, and I was just writing things, like writing whatever I was kind of learning, writing whatever I was experiencing.
Do you want to share a little bit about that? Like, how did you build this following? Like, it was just through sharing your thoughts and...
It was such an interesting thing. Yeah. I actually first started out, I had a food blog this was only a couple months, but this was my first taste of like wanting to reach people in some way. I had this food blog called Vegan Tennessean. I only did it for like 6 months, but I started like, posting recipes and like posting the things on my social media and all that kind of stuff. And there's this weird switch that happens when you go from using social media just as like you just post your dog and your cat or whatever, to being like, oh, I'm actually going to use this as a tool now. And so I started to go through that transformation. And then eventually when I was getting into yoga and meditation, I started doing, and I was a dancer too. So I really started liking photography a lot, like dance and yoga photography. And then I would just use the caption to like write whatever was coming up. And then it took a couple of years, but I just really stuck with it. And through networking and through really learning to engage with people and, learning to use social media as something that would reach people over time, it grew. And it was very gradual, very slow. And then there was a couple of things where like I would meet someone who would have a big social media and they would tag me in things. And then, just like all of these different things came together, and over time it grew. Yeah. So yeah, I remember when, cause I started it when I was in college. I really started actually actively creating and focusing on growth in that way. And yeah, it was really interesting. And I remember I remember this one time, it was almost like I was living this double life where I was in college and like being an engineer and spending like 16 hours doing like lab work because I was a researcher. Yeah. And then there was this other side of me that was like writing about like my experiences and like things I was thinking or whatever. And, people like all around the world following me, and like the two really didn't mix that much, except for when people would kind of like see what was going on, like I remember one person being like, coming up to me in choir and being like, Melissa, I just saw that you have 10,000 followers on Instagram. What is going on? And I was just like, I don't know. And I was so shy in person too. Like I was diagnosed with social anxiety when I was 16. I was so shy that it was also this outlet for me to practice expressing myself. And it was really healing to me to be able to be social in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So were you an undergrad with engineering?
That's when I started it, yeah. And then I continued it when I was in grad school for 2 years.
Oh.
Yeah. So then by the time I quit my job, I knew I had that outlet. I knew I was interested in personal growth, and I released a guided meditation album. That was the first thing I did. It was so sweet. My brother, who's a musician, helped me with it. And then it just kind of all evolved from there. And I eventually started a course. My first course was called Worthy. And I bet you can guess what it was about. It was about worthiness. And then it kept evolving. I eventually one of my friends asked me if we wanted to do a container together for entrepreneurs. And I would do more of the mindset side of it. And I'd also gotten interested in how working with your relationship with money could be really healing, especially because going from having a really stable job to having no job and no idea how I was going to support myself I had to really work on my relationship with money. So I started teaching about that, and then working with entrepreneurs and leadership and things like that. And, through COVID, that expanded a lot because a lot of people were quitting their jobs or, being let go from their jobs. And, so many people are taking their work and wanting to actually do what they want to do. So it's grown a lot in the past couple of years.
It's so interesting to hear about. So when you say social media, like, is it mostly Instagram, or are you? Because I think some people think about social media, they want to share more, but then I know I feel this way sometimes, like there's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else is out there. So it's like, feels like a lot to. So would you recommend someone just focus on one of those, or how do you think about that?
It depends on what you want to do. With anything, when it comes to running a business, the thing that's going to work best is the thing that actually works for you. If you're trying to do all the things, but you can't keep up with it and you're spreading yourself thin, then it's better to focus on, quality over quantity, right? So it's better to make, for instance, like 1 to 2 or 3 really great posts a week instead of feeling like, okay, I'm going to make 3 a day. And then by the end of 7 days, you like crash and burn, right? So I only use Instagram, and I make a podcast. But we've actually, even with the podcast, I used to do a show every week, but I'm actually now only doing 2 episodes a week. And the same with Instagram. I used to post like twice a day, and now I post like a couple times a week, and that's it.
Yeah, and that feels better to you.
Yeah, at this point, at that stage, I had more, I guess, kind of like free time a little bit. There's a couple of different things to go into it. I was definitely more like revved up in terms of like my nervous system and all the things. I was doing a lot of things, but then I also had like weird pockets of free time throughout the day. So I could like, be making posts and things like that. Now I value more just spaciousness, and having momentum definitely helps. So, and I'm doing all these other things in my business too. So that's what feels good for now. And you're allowed to change with it too, which is a great thing.
Because you're basically self-employed. I mean, it's your own creation, your own. I like that you name Be More Spacious, because so many of us are so busy all the time. To be able to pick and choose, make good choices about how we use our time, and to not have, like, when you say revved up like that, I'm imagining like adrenaline, like a certain amount of stress, like this sense of like, if I'm not always going, I'm gonna fall behind, or it's not gonna work, and that's a stressful way to live that I think social media like really feeds into that kind of mentality.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's so many. I think we've lived that way for a long time, especially in certain cultures. Like the United States, I think definitely has identified with that for a long time. Now we're starting to see more people who, are slowing down a bit. But there's been a lot of just like, it's all about productivity. I lived like that for a long time. Long time. I was like, I did so much. I remember having like, if I even had like 5 minutes of free time, and then that's like, I would seriously just be going from the time I got up to the time I went to bed, because I was going to school and then I was also working multiple jobs. I worked at a dance studio, I graded papers, I worked in laboratories, and and then I was like in choir, taking Spanish and dance classes. Like I was doing so much. I just kept myself so busy. And I remember if I had 5 free minutes, I would feel really uncomfortable and I would feel like I had to fill it. And even just like sitting and relaxing was like, it was really uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people just live that way,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there can be so much growth in leaning into that discomfort of just being with yourself, like being able to make friends with yourself. That's how I talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important thing. I think that awareness is growing in our culture, but there is a kind of, that productivity mindset. Maybe it's good to have a time in your life where you do that and then to like mature out of that and find more balance,
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
So, and you mentioned dance a few times. What kind of dance were you doing?
I was doing ballet.
I didn't know that about you.
Mainly. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a huge part of my life. Yeah. I wanted to be a professional dancer for a while. I started pretty late though. I started when I was 13, which is pretty late for a dancer. But I had this, again, I was living in Tennessee and we had this really hardcore, like Soviet defected, like 80-year-old teacher.
Oh, wow.
And she was like so intense. So that was like another, even in my, extracurriculars, I was like in these really intense, like you gotta push, you gotta work really hard. And, I loved it. And I remember coming to the studio where I ended up working and teaching when I was in college. And I remember going to the first class, and it was a more like chill, recreational, doing different kinds of dance. Like it wasn't just like, this is a ballet school. It was like, also you can do hip hop, also you can do tap, also you can do all these other things because it's fun. And I remember the woman who was my teacher there and became my boss and one of my best friends, I remember her looking at me and being like, do you want to be comfortable walking by the time you're 40? And I was like, yes. And she was like, then stop doing these things with your body. And I was just like, oh, okay. But I loved dance. Yeah. Yeah. It was a huge part of my life.
That's good. That's interesting. The Soviet defector teacher.
Oh yeah. She's so great. She's so sweet, right? Like I remember coming back to see her and her literally like welling up with tears to see like a group of us coming to see her who had already left. But it was definitely, the ballet world is really intense. It's really intense.
Yeah. That reminds me of my grandmother. My mother's mother was German Jewish, like, had this like German kind of disciplinarian attitude. Like she could be like super sweet too, but like in certain ways she would be very would be the word.
Yeah. I mean, it was so intense that like it was normal that I started late, so I got saved from a lot of this, but I had one of my friends ruptured a disc in her back when she was 16 and had to take a year off. And it was like, the doctors were like, this is the worst rupture we've seen at someone your age. One of my friends had hip surgery. One of my friends had knee surgery. And this is all when we're like 15, 16. Another one had ankle surgery in both of her ankles. It was just like, and that was normal. That's like normal in the ballet world. So that just goes back to the whole conversation about like how these like unhealthy ways of living, and we do this mentally too. We do this physically. Like I saw my dad have a heart attack because of how much stress and overwork he had in his life, right? It's like physically and mentally we exhaust ourselves, and it's considered normal.
Yeah. It's obviously more sustainable and healthier and happier to not push that much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other interesting thing you said was about like that you were kind of a shy person, and that you were developing this big following on social media and expressing yourself in that way more so than in like actual like real life interactions. Is that? I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a little more balanced now for sure. And I actually think, you know how people can say, oh, being on social media can make you, it can be, you know, here's the thing. I see it as something that's pretty neutral. It depends on how you're using it. It does have the potential to make you question yourself a lot and to feel really, you know, like lose your confidence. Say if you're like consuming a lot of other people's stuff and you're comparing yourself a lot, or obviously to not be very present or distracted in your life, right? But you can also use it as a tool for creativity and for expression and for, you know, helping people and for connection. And then that, if you're really having a lot of boundaries around, am I just consuming things mindlessly, or am I being really clear about how I'm going to use it, I think it can actually be something that's really good. So for me, it ended up being something that really helped me find my voice and find my sense of who I was in the world. And that helped me. A lot of my friends actually I made through social media, and a lot of my friends now do similar work to me. And we just kind of have an understanding that this is part of who we are, you know?
So you have like real genuine, real life friendships with people that you connected with on social media. That's awesome to hear.
Mm-hmm. A lot of them. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've met a lot of people in real life through social media and ended up having great friendships with them. And it's cool too, because then you can kind of go anywhere in the world. You know, I've met people in New York, in Canada, in Colorado, in LA, in Europe, like London, Scotland, in Switzerland, all through just like people that I knew on social media. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And then, I mean, I appreciate your kind of, so you're like to have boundaries with it, so that you're not, you're being careful about the content you're reading. Like you're not just scrolling through it a lot. You're kind of, I guess it seems like there's a good distinction, since we're on the subject, to be made between creating something that you're sharing versus like taking stuff in, consuming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do you help yourself have boundaries with that? Because it's so easy to get sucked in, right? And then like 10 or 20 minutes go by and you've just been scrolling through it, and that's like the danger of it, or a big part of the danger.
Yeah, for sure. It's very different now from when it used to be. I'm definitely more clean with it now than I used to be. But also, you know, one thing I'll say is that because I do have more people in my audience now, and people like part of my time that I spend on social media, or a lot of it actually, is either I'm creating or I'm like responding to messages. So that takes up a lot of my time, where I can't really just be scrolling. Otherwise, I won't actually get to these people who are reaching out to me about different things, right? Either just like forming a connection with people, or if they're asking about, you know, my work or anything like that. So that automatically starts to set a boundary, because it's like, here are things that I not necessarily need to do, but like I need to do for my business, right?
Like prioritizing.
Yeah, I prioritize that, right? But if you don't have, okay, I check my messages and there's like, I need to respond to like these like 25 messages or whatever, and that takes up time. It's more of a just noticing, does something feel like, because even with consuming, it can still benefit you, right? It can still be inspiring, but you just have to notice how you feel. And a good way to do this is to regularly go through and clean out who you're following. I did this thing a couple months ago where I literally unfollowed everyone,
Oh.
and then went back and followed people slowly that I was like, okay, this feels clear that I actually want to follow this. Because over time we can just be following all this people, and then we're taking in stuff that we don't actually, isn't actually beneficial, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say that. And then I would say just notice when it starts to turn from this feels intentional, like I'm reading someone I love's post and actually intentionally responding to it, versus when it starts to flip that switch into just like not intentional space filling. And those two things can overlap sometimes, you know, like there's like the reels on Instagram now, those little videos, they design it to be like, to pull you in, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like TikTok, right? Like there's these little videos. So sometimes I'll like be like looking through those, and part of me is like, this is like research, because you reuse sounds, right? Like you use other people's sounds or things like that to create your own. Like a lot of them, there's like trends, so you make videos that are similar to other people's videos. But then where's the line crossed to, oh, I'm just like consuming stuff?
Right.
And it just depends. Like if I'm sitting here, and this has happened, if I'm sitting here doing this and then my partner's sitting there like, hey, you want to like hang out? Then obviously like I'm crossing that line, you know? It just depends on your own priorities and your own. And not everyone wants to grow like a social media. You don't have to grow a big social media following to have a business. You don't have to grow a big social media following to impact people either.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good to have choice, right, and be clear. And it makes me think about like your diet. Like we all know to be careful of the food we take in, but it seems like there's this growing awareness. I think that movie on Netflix did a good job talking about it. Like the information we're taking in, we need to watch that. We need to be careful. And
totally. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
That's good. This is inspiring me I want to do what you suggested, clean everything out and then choose who I follow. But I don't really spend that much time on Instagram, for example, or Facebook.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't, you know, so it just depends. I do, but again, it's because that's like, I could have a whole day where I don't get on my computer and I did my work for the day, like just being on Instagram, and it actually is like productive, you know?
Yeah. I guess I have this desire, like I want to feel connected and tuned into what's going on to some degree with the popular culture, with the world at large. And there've definitely been times in my life in the past where I like totally disconnected from all that, and that can be good, but there's also a cost to it because you don't know as much like what the trend is or what's popular or whatever. Maybe you don't need to,
but that too, like with social media, like you don't have to, there's so many different creatives who use it that you don't have to necessarily be following like celebrities. Like it's not just like people follow, it gives so many different people a voice, because you can share anything and you can share what you truly believe. So it's not just like, you don't have to follow like the mainstream news. You don't have to follow celebrities. You don't have to follow, you can literally choose what is it that I want to be paying attention to, you know, and like voting with your energy in that way. So that's where it gets really, if you're really intentional about who you're following, it can be really inspiring.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, it's just an interesting world we're creating where, like you just said, you can really be intentional and choose the people you follow, the information you take in. And then I've heard, you know, people talk about how that potential cost of that, where you're kind of creating your own little bubble, and then you can disconnected from actual information that's actually relevant and important, and I think coronavirus COVID really brought that up for so many people. Like, are you going to listen to Dr. Fauci, or are you going to listen to this guy on YouTube, raving about the world government taking over or whatever? We're just in such a weird time of all this mixture of different information sources, and who do we believe and trust. But I think what you're speaking to is a more positive way of, like, you can take in good information, you can make good choices,
Well, it also can be used as a little bit of an exercise too, where it's like, can you consume things? Can you, like, be around people who don't actually believe what you believe and are saying things that you might not agree with, and still form your own decisions?
That's good. That's a healthier approach. Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of being like, I'm going to bubble myself and only listen to these, like, be in this echo chamber, it's like there can be this balance where it can be used as a tool to strengthen, like, going back to discernment. I mean, it's not like we have to, call everybody that we disagree with or makes us uncomfortable toxic and push everybody away. It also can strengthen our resilience to be around different ideas and different kind of people and all that kind of thing.
I've played with that, and that's good. I think it's good to do, and it's good to look at it as a practice. It can be hard. It can also be, like, I've tuned into some people that, like, what was that guy's name? Alex Jones. I'm not necessarily recommending this, but I could totally feel how people get sucked into, because he's such a powerful communicator and is this manic quality, and before you know it, like, he's just all over the place. But I could just see why he has the reputation he has.
That's another thing about the interesting thing about social media is that, and all of these people turning into, like, seeing myself turn into someone where, like, people listen to me, right? Like, people will pay me just to, like, listen to me talk, right? And I want to be really careful that I'm not sitting here being like, I have the definitive answers, and we shouldn't look at other people, especially just humans on social media, as this is, like, an enlightened being who, like, has all the answers. Like, I think the best people to receive advice from, whether that be, I try to make this my approach when I'm teaching people business, is helping people make their own decisions. Because so often, especially in something that can be as complicated and overwhelming as business, we just look outside of us. I did this so many times and wasted literally, like, thousands of dollars on doing this by being like, someone just tell me what to do. Someone just tell me the answers. And even in something as simple as, like, your email marketing, it's like, there's no one way to do things. What works for you is something that you're going to have to test out and try for yourself. And once it clicks in, and once you find your own way to think and to choose and to do things and to, like, be in your power around things, then it'll work so much better. And, like, when you have the flexibility to allow that to change too, and you're not just getting into this state where you're like, it's this one way and it has to be like this and that kind of thing.
No, yeah, I agree totally. Well, I wanted to ask you about, we're talking about, like, social media, and you started at a young age and built up this following and built this business and career and everything. Like, there's a quality, right, of, like, sharing your journey, and then also teaching people eventually, like, offering courses and coaching. I guess, like, I'm curious about, I think some people hold back maybe from sharing because they want to be an expert before they share. And it sounds like you've kind of gone this other route of, like, sharing as you go. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, that's why there always has to be a humility, like a sense of, at least for me, I feel like more people are willing to listen to me at this point, because I'm still very vulnerable and saying like some of my best content and my best pieces of, like connection things like marketing are the parts where I admit that I don't fully know. I don't know what I'm doing. And I like, yes, I built this like big business and all this stuff, but I still like still get confused and all of these things. And when I think there's this shift happening where people are craving more transparency and more vulnerability and more of like a human connection in the people that they're learning from and the people they're receiving from. I think there's two sides of it. Of course, with things, you can't claim, education is so important, right? Like certifications, degrees, all that kind of stuff when it comes to, like traditional medicine, therapy, all these kind of things where there's a lot of responsibility, and those things can actually like help you build your confidence. But there's also this side where you can build confidence through experience. And I think our culture is coming to value experience as well, where for a long time, again, it was more of this productivity, kind of how it looks, how, I have to wear this suit. And it was more of like this masculine paradigm where it's like, and that's good, right? But maybe it was a little out of balance, where we're coming back to a more like grounded, experiential, more, maybe a bit more approachable. But that can trip people up, because you can make all these like judgments about, oh, what are people going to think about me? Yeah. And do I know enough to even talk about this, to do this? And the whole like imposter syndrome thing, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's a balance to it for sure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, have you, in terms of vulnerability, I mean, it must be like, I've experienced this where like you share something that's vulnerable to some degree, and then afterwards you're like, oh my God, how's that going to be received or responded to?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, that's
all the time.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's part of that's part of it. I'm so used to just being on like, I think the way I look at growth now is like, it's like you do something that's uncomfortable, you do something that's like past your comfort zone, and it's like, it feels edgy because it's literally on the edge of your comfort zone, right? So it just that, but then you have to do integration. You have to do like working with your nervous system, working with any sort of like, those thoughts that come up, working with feelings of, feeling safe and being outside of the little limitation box that we, have somehow developed around ourselves, right? So then you have to like integrate. And then I remember the things that used to make me really uncomfortable don't make me that uncomfortable anymore, right? It's just growth. It's just the process of growth. It's just like, can you steer that growth? It just depends on what you want. You know what I mean? What you want to do. So if it's what you want, then like steer your growth in that direction, lean into your edges, and then do some integration when you feel uncomfortable. and it'll all work out. I see so often, one thing that can happen is people will do the things that are uncomfortable, and they'll do a lot of it, but this is going back to that like impulsivity and that kind of thing. Right. And they'll just be like, oh, I've got to, okay, I'm just going to like put this offer out there, and I'm going to like post a bunch on social media, but they're not actually noticing what's going on in their body while they're doing it. And then eventually they like shut down and they're like, oh, this isn't working. You have to like titrate it. You have to do it slowly so that it actually becomes sustainable, versus just being like, I'm on social media now, Yeah. It's like, it's little steps for sure.
I really appreciate how you talk about that. So they're going to your edge, testing your comfort zone, and then taking time to integrate. You're kind of regulating your nervous system. Like how would you advise people to help regulate or help integrate?
Totally, yeah. Well, I can give an example that would maybe help. I give this example a lot in like when I'm teaching classes, if I'm teaching a marketing class or like a leadership class or social media class or something like that. But recently I was doing, this wasn't that recent actually. This was maybe like 8 months ago. I released this class and I did a live and it was in the last few days of the launch of the class. It was a pretty big class. It was more than just like a course. It was pretty substantial, right? And I did this live where I was talking about the class, and I usually try to like meditate and feel grounded before I do this live, before I like go live, right? Because it's still really edgy to me to just like go on a live video and like talk about my work. And so I do it, and then I did not feel grounded the entire time. And it felt to me like I was just kind of bumbling through it. But I was like saying what my intention was for the class and who it was for and what was all involved and stuff. And it was only maybe 10 minutes. And then I get off and my brain, I felt like embarrassed. Like I felt like that was not good. Like I should take that down. Like that's the thoughts and that's how I felt. And so I just go and I lay on the couch and I just did some deep breathing. And a lot of times that's all I do a lot of times is just really slow, deep breathing and just notice the thoughts that I'm having. And, and then kind of soothe myself, like by saying things like, you're enough, that was fine. Like nobody judges you as hard as you judge yourself, like all that kind of stuff. So breathing's really great. Any sort of meditation practice is great. Going out into nature is great. The more you can really just like notice how you feel around stuff and notice your own judgments on your work is really powerful, because that's what's going to hold you back the most is your own judgments on what you're creating. And so I'm doing that. And then I, like an hour later, someone signed up for this class and sent me a message and was like, I got into 3 minutes of that video and I was sold.
Oh, wow.
And I told this story later in that class, and she had no idea that I was having this experience of being like, you suck. No one likes you. No one wants to be in your work. That's a little harsh, but she had no idea. She was sitting there being like, this is great. This is exactly what I need. And like paid me a lot of money. So like any sort of thing where we can just observe what we're feeling, because we kind of have to do this thing that's a bit like an icebreaker where you just rip off the Band-Aid and then you have to like hold your hand there and be like, okay, we good. And then it settles down. But the discomfort's always the strongest at the first. So you just have to be with the discomfort and then it becomes more comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate how you describe that, because it's important to be with those thoughts, with those feelings in a soothing, helpful way rather than try to run away from them, for example. Or you can use like pretty much all the techniques you listed, walking or breathing or meditating or yoga. You can kind of use them to try to get away from what you're experiencing instead of to be with what you're experiencing. I think that distinction is so huge.
Totally. Yeah. I think with anything, when it comes to like being creative and to being like in expression and that kind of thing, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's just like, that's just going to be part. I get uncomfortable around my work at least once a day, like if not many times a day. But I like the challenge, like I like it at this point,
Yeah.
I remember it used to trip me up so much, like not knowing what it was going to be like. I remember first getting started, one of my biggest fears was like, what is it going to be like in 5 years? Like, how am I going to be supporting myself 5 years? No, it's like I have no idea, but you can come into more presence, and you can come into more of that spontaneity when you let go of like how it's all going to work out and how it all has to be, and what are people going to think of me? And then you're just kind of like doing things, and then it just kind of comes together day by day and can grow, because you're not trying to like control it all, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can relate to that thing of putting something out there and then afterwards all the being so self-critical and then having someone else come along and be like, "Wow, that was really good." I'm like, "Really?" Okay.
Yeah. I know.
Another kind of, this makes me think of another obstacle that I've seen in myself with the podcast in particular is like sometimes feeling like, oh, it doesn't matter, or what's the point? And like the other day, I've talked to a number of different other therapists, psychotherapists on here, and this other therapist that was on the podcast a long time ago messaged me. He's like, "Oh, someone listened to the podcast that we did together, and they're my client now. So thank you for that. It was really good." And I was like, "Wow, okay." Like it does matter. Like people do listen. It's like what?
Yeah, totally. My opinion is that when we think of like ego, sometimes, like at least my perception of it, like my like surface level is like someone who's like really arrogant and like really like, yeah, like I'm great, like I'm the best, you know? But there's this like the flip side of it is like the person who's like, you know? So imposter syndrome is like just another form of our ego that's trying to keep us safe by being like, is this even good? Is anybody going to care about this? It's really us just caring about ourselves at that point. It's us. What's actually under there a lot of times is like, am I wasting my time? Is anybody watching me? You know, it all comes back to like, how are people seeing me? Right. When instead, if we can be focused on you know, not necessarily like especially when you're doing something with social media, it's so easy to get caught up in numbers, because you see your followers as numbers. It lists, this is how many likes you have, this is how many comments, this is how many podcast views, where it's taking people and turning them into a number, where even one person who could listen to something and it could change their life, literally. Like, I'm sure you've listened to a show, I can remember specific podcast episodes that changed my life, right?
Yeah, me too.
Specific people's posts, specific people's books that changed my life. And if we can do that for one person, like literally change the course of their life, that's amazing. It doesn't have to be focused on so many people, but what tends to happen is when you have that focus of like, if this just helps one person, there's a different frequency that's going into your work. There's a different energetic that starts to like ripple out that people can feel. And it's not saying that like, oh, it's wrong. Like, it's not shaming imposter syndrome or shaming like, because I feel that all the time, right? Like it happens all the time. But it's like, can we start to integrate it and change that default to more of that focus outward on the people who are reading the things and listening to the things. With a podcast, it can be, sometimes it's hard to do. I've had this experience too, where I'm like, is anybody actually listening to this? Because you don't have, like when I post an Instagram post, someone is commenting on it, right? Or like when I post a story, people can reply to it. You know, when I'm like teaching a class, someone can like sit there in the chat box and be like, thank you, this was great. But a podcast is like, there's no audience live. You literally just see listener views, unless you're asking people to like say, hey, will you like send me a message and tell me what you think, or can you share this, or something like that. And then it's nice to have that engagement back and forth, because it does motivate you. You know, it is nice feeling the result of the work you're putting out there, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, podcasts are interesting. I think I do get messages, from time about it, and that's great, and talk to people. I've also like one thing that I've done, if there's a particular speaker or author or whatever, you can search on the if you have an iPhone, you can search the podcasts and find them, and I found some amazing podcasts that were from months or years ago that have changed my life. And I think a downside perhaps of the podcast space and media in general now, there's just so much being created all the time. I mean, it's good and bad. It's beautiful in its own way, but there's this pressure to constantly create. And so I really do want to value quality over quantity, like you were saying, and not just be contributing noise to the information ecosphere. I don't want to put things out just for the sake of putting them out.
Yeah. It's all about intention, right? It's all about how you actually feel when you're doing it, why you're doing it. I know people who put something out every once in a while and it's amazing. I know people who are cranking out content every single day and it's amazing, right? And you can tell they're so just clear in what they're doing and literally just are changing people's lives every day. So it all just depends on it all comes down to intention, really, with all of it.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's like planting seeds, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
Well, I'm aware of the time here. Do you have any last words for us?
I don't think so. I'd love for you to come on my show in the next few months, and we can do that. But yeah,
you want to say the name of your show for people?
It's Air and Earth. Air, and then an ampersand, and then Earth. I randomly chose it when I was 25. I had no idea what it was going to be about or anything, but yeah, that's the name of it. Mm-hmm.
Great. Cool. Yeah, and I'll share some links in the show notes if people want to find you and learn more.
Yeah, definitely. I always encourage people. So like I said, I'm active on Instagram. So, and I value personal exchange. I have a good amount of people in my following, but I really like person-to-person contact still, for sure. That's what keeps me going. So feel free to send me a DM and Beautiful. Let me know that you found me through here.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to support this show, we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/A State of Mind. Even $5 or $10 really makes a big difference. You can also message me, let me know what you think. And if you'd like to learn more about my work as a psychotherapist, meditation teacher, coach, and speaker and all that, check out my website, astateofmindcounseling.org. We are also got some new t-shirts for sale. The podcast website is astateofmindpodcast.com. Check them out. We've got tank tops now, multiple t-shirts, colors, stickers, hopefully some new artwork coming soon. Check that out. Thank you, Stephen Newman and Tyler Cates, for help with music and with graphic design and all of that. Thank you so much. I will see you here next time.